So we're going to move on to our second panel, entitled Consumers, What Motivates Them to Save? So let me start by introducing our moderator, John Braille, who is Vice President, Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud, or anti-fraud, right, at the National Consumer League. The National Consumers League is America's oldest consumer organization and a champion for helping Americans build and protect their financial security. At the National Consumers League, Mr. Braille coordinates the League's policy activity and manages the National Consumer League's Fraud Center and the Alliance Against Fraud Coalition. Prior to NCL, he served as research director of the nonprofit Telecommunication Research and Action Center, or TRAC, where he educated and advocated on behalf of residential and small business consumers of communication services. So with that, let me turn it over to John to introduce the panel.
Sure. Oops. There we go. Good morning. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. My name is John Braille, and with the National Consumers League. The one thing I wanted to add to the many programs that we do at NCL that relate to financial empowerment is a great program, just drawing on one of the questions that was asked at the end of the previous panel around how do you help young people before they get to college start to make sound financial choices and learn about that. We have a wonderful program at NCL called Life Smarts, where we help tens of thousands of high school students every year get education not just about financial literacy, but about a wide range of consumer protection topics. And so we have flyers out on the table outside. You're free to pick up on the way out. But enough about me. So I'd like to introduce the panel to my left, who I think it goes without saying are some of the smartest minds in the country when it comes to financial literacy and financial empowerment. So first to my left, your right, is Ali Vered. She is the director of the America Saves campaign at the Consumer Federation of America, one of the great consumer organizations that we love to call colleagues in this fight. She has been, hold on, there, all right. That's good enough, all right. To Ali's left is Michal Grinstein-Weiss. She is a professor at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. And finally, Tim Flock. He is the executive director of Commonwealth. So we're going to do the agenda on this panel a little bit differently. Michal's going to get up and present to you on some really amazing research that she has been doing at Washington University. And then after she gives her presentation, we're going to discuss her findings, which I think you'll find really interesting, and then go into some other topics we have. So, Michal? Here.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm actually going to present some research that I'm doing in collaboration with Intuit folks. Many of them are in the room today, including, of course, Dave and Krista and Joe and Melissa. So I'm very delighted. I want to thank the Intuit Tax and Financial Center for inviting me to this exciting event and for giving us the opportunity to present and discuss our collaborative role around the tax time moment and around the refund to saving initiatives. It was great to hear Treasurer Corenza providing her keynote and thinking about these topics in the new administration, and it's just truly an honor to be here with all of you today. So I have 5 minutes to give you, kind of a big overview of this 5 years initiative that we have been doing, working with Intuit on the tax time moment. Or under initiative we call the Refund to Saving. So the Refund to Saving is an ongoing collaboration designed to capitalize the tax time moment to build financial security. One of the unique characteristics of the Refund to Saving initiative is this industry academic partnership. So we're working with Washington University, Duke University, and Intuit to do this work. We use behavioral economics techniques to encourage tax filers to make good financial decisions at the tax time. And we built our intervention on the TurboTax Freedom Edition, which is the free version of the TurboTax for low and moderate income households to file their federal taxes. So as I mentioned, we have been in this initiative over the last 5 years, and since we began, we have tested our intervention using randomized control trials, so very rigorous techniques, with over 500,000 filers each year, with the goal of developing low-cost, low-touch, and scalable saving intervention. Really designed to see what we can do to impact policy and get more people to save at tax time. So why did we focus on the tax time moment? I think we already heard a lot this morning, a little bit about it. And as many people say, it's important financial moment. There is a moment that a lot of money is shifting hands. There is 80% of the US population who are receiving a refund, and the refund amount is quite sizable. But just to put it into perspective to the people who are on free file, what it's mean this refund to them, I want to share some perspective from our refund. People who received the refund last year, we found that the refund was the equivalent of 2.5 months of what they were paying on housing and 1.3 months of what they earn as income. So very significant for this low and moderate income household. And in addition, another perspective why we chose to focus on the tax time moment is from behavioral economics. This is a really important moment to intervene. This is the just-in-time intervention, what the field called them, or the moment that, the money is yours, but not quite in your hand, and you really need to make this decision what you're going to do with the refund. So how we have been using behavioral economics and how we are using the TurboTax Freedom Edition as a platform for innovation. We use a bunch of different techniques, but I want to walk you through the most successful one that we have used, which is choice architecture. To illustrate that example, I want you to all think about your grocery store experience. When you get to the checkout aisle, we are all facing many temptations. So how many times you end up leaving with the candy you didn't plan to, or spend some time figuring out what Brand and Angelina are doing today? But what if instead we have presented you there with more healthier food and more intellectual reading? So this is kind of what we are doing with behavioral economics, choice architecture, and the tax time saving. When people are getting to the finishing file, we're working with the Intuit team to change the screen file and make saving more salient, more easier, and more kind of the full thing they can think of. To really illustrate that, we have an handout. If you just later want to pick on that, I'll just, it's slide number 3 that show you really how we make it more salient. So you have it in your in your things. But we also include motivational messaging, kind of calling people to think about emergencies or retirement and give them kind of clues about why they should save the refund. So I think I have 2 minutes left, so I want to kind of share with you the high-level result. We have learned, of course, a lot during these 5 years, and I have tons more to share, but I will focus on the high-level result. And what we found that with just these small changes to the TurboTax screen, we have helped thousands of people save millions of dollars. So in this last year of our intervention, we were able to get over 30,000 new savers that wouldn't have saved without the intervention, and nearly $40 million in savings over the last year. And finally, we were also able to track a little bit of this, what we call long-term impact, the 6 months impact. So we are intervening and serving our participant at 2-point time every year, immediately after they finish filing their taxes and then 6 months later. And what we found is that this impact of saving some of your refund tax time really have long-term impact of our participants. We found that people 6 months later are more likely to still have some of the refund saved compared to the control group who did not went through the intervention. They are more likely to have higher portion of the refund saved. They are more likely to report that they can come up with $2,000 in case of emergency. And they were more likely to open a saving account if they didn't have one before the intervention. So this is just a few high-level results of our intervention, and I'm looking forward to discussing it more during the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michal. That was it's really fascinating research. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the slide deck that's in your packet, you can get a lot of what Michal was just talking about behavioral architecture. When I was thinking about behavioral architecture in financial savings, I was thinking about what I do with my 10-year-old and my 13-year-old at home. They eat like locusts. And so what we do is we put the fruit in a bowl on the dining room table, and we put the chips in the back of a cabinet in the kitchen, because there's one thing I can count on with 10 to 13-year-olds is laziness. So making the healthy choice easy definitely works in our house. We just have to get started on the financial part of it. Ali and Tim, Michal just discussed sort of an intervention that she has done through the Refund to Savings program and how that worked. And both of you have really interesting programs that you're doing at CFA and at Commonwealth. Could you talk about a similar intervention that you all have been doing, and what are the results that you've seen? I'll start with you, Ali.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who don't know, America Saves the America Saves campaign. It's a national opportunity for over 2,000 organizations to engage in conversation about savings and savings messages. And we are very firmly in the motivational space. We are not in the financial education space. So we rely on our network of partners who are in the capability building, and many of them are here today, to carrying out that work. They rely on us for support, and they rely on us for the opportunity to bring up conversations about savings in different ways. And we talked about some of that today. Some of it's programmatic in the case of Save Your Refund, and in our America Saves for Young Workers program, which also works with youth employment programs. But what does it mean, the motivational space, and what is this challenge, to your questions as well? We talk a lot about the teachable moment, and I want to actually sort of pivot a little bit and talk about the experiential moment. Because, we as Americans are very invested in the legend of the hero's journey. I'm going to call it the saver's journey, where we start out with a challenge. We have our protagonist, and he's got some challenges along the way. But those challenges are made up of multiple growth opportunities. There are micro moments within those teachable moments. To me, teachable sounds a little bit patronizing. I mean, teachable sounds like they're coming to me and I've got some knowledge to, and I'm going to tell them how they might not be doing something correctly, and that they can do it the right way. And I just think that from a motivational standpoint, that nuance has to shift. And we have tremendous opportunities to do that in new and different ways. And I talked about the programmatic opportunities. But to support that saver, to reduce the friction on their journey to being transformed as a consumer, that is our real task. And social and media and technology have come together for us in an incredible way to enable this to happen. And our goal at America Saves is to support our partners. We actually have 3 motivational opportunities at America Saves. The first motivational opportunity is to engage those VitaSite volunteers. Mary was talking about, to have the chutzpah to talk about money, because money is the most difficult thing for anybody to talk about. More difficult than any other topic. And you're meeting people at a moment where they have a lot of anxiety. Taxes don't bring up a lot of good feelings. They bring up a lot of feelings, not necessarily good ones. At the same time, within that teachable moment, or within that experiential moment, the tax preparer is a one-on-one, able to share their experience, their lived experience, and in a way that helps that person understand to grab a little bit of power into their hands and to meet the challenges on their journey. And I'll just kind of wrap up with it. Well, the second opportunity is obviously the core nuts and bolts of America Saves, which is to convince that saver that they can do it, to convince that person that it is within their grasp, that one small action and a consistent, continual commitment, making a plan, means that you're going to be twice as likely to be successful. at achieving it. So that's our next challenge. We have the America Saves Pledge, which invites people into that conversation over the long term with a very specific goal. Because we know if people can have success with a small goal, they're going to have success with a larger goal. How do we do that? We do that through social marketing. We do that through, infused with principles of behavioral economics, and we do that over the long term. And we've engaged over 285,000 savers in conversations about reaching their specific goals. I think the opportunities for us to be more measurable are tremendous. And again, we rely on a lot of our partners. We are looking for opportunities to do research and test the effectiveness of pledges and the effectiveness of new technologies and these interventions that may come by mobile device and other ways that we can nurture savers. And you know what? The next opportunity is to have them share their experience. And that can happen in virtual communities, that can happen in their actual communities, that can happen with their friends and families. Because celebration of a goal and achievement creates a whole host of other opportunities, not just for the saver, but for the people that they influence around them.
Great. Thank you, Allie. Tim?
Hi, everybody. It's delightful to be here, and many of you are long-term friends and colleagues. For those of you who don't know, Commonwealth is a national nonprofit. We build solutions to make people financially secure. I really want to build on a couple themes that I already hear. First of all, it's been my experience over a long time in this work that people fundamentally want to save. That we're not really starting from a place of trying to get people to do something that they don't believe in. And I think that's critical. I mean, first of all, I don't want to be in the business of trying to push somebody somewhere they don't want to be, right? But also, I think it shifts our perspective. And the way it shifts it is our job, our responsibility, our privilege is to find ways to help people get where they already want to go. And to make it, and here I'll switch into the question on the table, as easy and possible as we can. So some things that many of you I think are aware of, but I think are worth calling out is one of the great and underappreciated contributions that many people in this room, and in particular the IRS, has made in the last decade or so, is an architecture, a set of pipes, a plumbing system, so that you can take these massive refunds that we've heard so much about, $8,000, that's probably the largest one that I've heard, and make it practical for people to divide that up and send it to more than one place. Right? This is not glamorous stuff, but that's where the rubber meets the road. I see Susan nodding, right? You know what we're talking about. And what we found in our work on this sort of long journey is that some people don't have a place for that pipe to plug into, right? I mean, that's still a thing. There are many people who are either un or underbanked or who are not likely to bring that savings account information. David would, but bring it with them to the tax moment and know what their account number is, or for whom, the terms of those products really don't meet their lifestyle. And we're very, very pleased and proud that for now 5 or 6 years, the U.S. Treasury has said, we actually have a solution for you, and you don't have to do anything other than check a box, and we'll issue you an inflation-protected, no-fee, fundamentally secure savings product, which is a U.S. savings bond, and that's available right through the tax filing process. So these types of things don't get a lot of attention, but they make a big difference. There are about 1 million people a year who use this split refund capability. We're now up to several 100,000 people, many, many, many of them low and moderate income people, who have put some of their precious refunds into a savings bond, often with their kid's name right on it, and they have a certificate somewhere in their house that often has a picture of Martin Luther King on it and their kid's name printed right on it in courier type. Think about the symbolism of that. So I think easy and possible is the foundation. And when we get that right, then we move on to the cool stuff, which is fun and rewarding. Mm-hmm. And there's a nice slip in your packet that highlights something we've had the chance to collaborate with CFA on, which is to offer people a chance to win a prize for doing this thing that they want to do and they know they need to do. So if you use that system and you split up your refund and you put some of it into savings, you sign your name up and you have a chance to win a $35,000 prize pool every year. And that's, we've had nearly 12,000 people do that over the last several years. So I think those are some of the things that we've seen. The last thing I wanted to say, it's just an important point, but it hasn't come up so much. When we think about this system, obviously we think about tax filers, real individual people, but we also need to be thinking about the tax preparers or the software on the other side of it. And when we create these systems and these programs and these tools, what we're also doing is we're creating a reason for one of Mary's volunteers, who are, I'm sure, very busy, probably overwhelmed, they have a waiting room full of people, and take a precious moment and say, did you think about splitting up that refund and putting some into savings? And the equivalent is true in the electronic space. So we need to think about the incentives at both that tax filer level and also at the delivery system level.
Great. Well, it's interesting. So Tim and Ali, building on what you said, my takeaways were people want to save. There are lots of opportunities for them to save, both through the tax filing system itself and through great organizations like Mary's to help them with that. What are the biggest challenges? Why don't they save more? I'll throw that out to the whole panel.
Well, go ahead, Nicole.
No.
Please.
So and Tim, I'm sure you will build off of me. I think, the basic to start right, of course, they do have low income, and that's hard, but we know that they can, and we have the evidence that they do, and they are interested. One other thing that make it really hard is the high level of income volatility. Both incomes that are unpredictable. This is low-income people who work several jobs, who work shift, who have unpredictable incomes and also unpredictable expenses. So the combination of both of these make it very, very difficult. And just to give you one quick statistics, a few statistics on the unpredictable expenses that low-income face, and that's again coming from this refund to saving initiative. We have a component of a household financial survey when we go a deeper dive into the finance of this low-income household when they're finishing the tax refund, and we have a survey with about 20 to 30,000 households every year. What we have learned, we asked them about the level of emergency or income shocks that they experienced in the last 6 months. So just to throw a few, a quarter reported that they have a job loss or income reduction in the last 6 months. A fifth of the population report that they have a medical emergency in the last 6 months. A third reported that they have a car that breaks down. So this is just a few, and I can go on and on, but there is like this, I think to summarize, it's unpredictable income and a lot of expenses that are also unpredictable with shocks and emergencies.
Can I just add to that?
Please.
Yes, income volatility or variability is going to be an increasingly big barrier for all kinds of savings, I think, with the gig economy, because then you're talking about different kinds of savings vehicles that aren't available to those workers, that like retirement 401ks or those types of things. And there are really big tax implications as well, which of course this crowd is well aware of. But I wanted to say, what are the barriers? Well, thinking about an amount is a big barrier, and that's why I encourage people to talk about savings as an activity rather than an amount. Because if you get into that habit and you can focus on just that very small daily expenditure, and I learned this from my years in credit counseling, it's the dollar not spent that's the dollar saved, right, at the end of the day. And so really getting people to think about their expenses and where those dollars are leaking out on a daily basis is really the start, because that is where they can start to see the money that they can save. I mean, they're always going to save the other money, right, which kind of is the tax time is the other money. That's the money you can save. But the money that you have every day is not really money to save in your mind. And so what are the opportunities behaviorally to get people to think about the money in their hand as money they can save?
And I would just sort of modify the question a little bit and say, I don't think I know, what the biggest challenges are. I think all the ones that have been listed are certainly there, but maybe the thing to think about is what could we possibly control, and I think Michal's presentation reminds us that if you put the message out there in the right way at the right time, people respond. Again, they really want to do this.
Right.
And I feel like that's an interesting thing for us all to think about is what can we do in our different parts of this ecosystem to get this message out to people early and often and conveniently. And I think government has a special role to play in that. And maybe at a one level up, it's not just about the once a year, do this thing to the, this is not how you really connect with people, it's starting from a foundation of a norm, of a sense of this is a common value we have because it's good for us as a people, it's good for us as a country, it's good for us as individuals. And I think, the things that the IRS does and the Treasury Department does have practical implications and they have symbolic implications. And when the U.S. Treasury says there's a policy designed to encourage you to save, what the subtext is, this is the right thing to do. This is a smart thing to do. And no one else probably has the equivalent bully pulpit for that. So I think we need to focus on that too.
Just to sort of I'm a little bit more cynical in the sense that I have no problems with appealing to people's instant need for gratification. I have no problem. I'm looking for those micro moments. When you're on Pinterest looking at cheap decorating ideas, is that a transformational moment? Yes, it is. We're all on the journey to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, and we got to be out there in all of those places where people are seeking. They're seeking answers to their question. They're seeking solutions to their problems, and their problems, their barriers to saving are problems that are presented in their daily lives over and over again.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. I mean, you all are talking about sort of income volatility, for example, and the data you were giving, Michal, about income shocks and being caused by job loss, medical emergencies, car breakdown, things like that. Well, that gets me, particularly for low to moderate income consumers, thinking broadly, what does it mean to them to be financially empowered? Is it just to be able to withstand those shocks? Or is it sort of saving for sort of for retirement, which could be decades off? When you talk to consumers, what do they say makes them feel financially empowered?
I think to be financially empowered, I think three things need to happen, right? I think you need to be able to meet basic need. So you need to have access to food, shelter, address your medical need. I think you need to be able to deal with this emergency. I think that's a really important component. So usually the rule of thumb here is saying you need to have income to cover 3 months. You need to have 3 months of income that you can cover with liquid saving available, or to use a credit card that you can pay off. So if you hit an emergency, you're able to deal with it in the kind of small saving that you have, or a credit card, but not going to alternative financial services. And finally, to be financial security is yes. To me, the answer is yes. Ability to save a little bit, put a little bit of money toward retirement, toward education, toward your long-term goals. So I think all of these need to happen to be financially secure today.
Good. Tim, please.
I mean, I completely agree. I think in even simpler terms, it's security. The amount of your headspace that's consumed with making sure you pay your bills every month, which ties to emergency savings and access to credit. So it's security, and then it's aspiration, right? There has to be something beyond that. And I think that speaks to the long-term savings. For some of us, it may not be retirement, especially given where you are in the life cycle or what your sense of your own future looks like. But there has to be something. Maybe it is that vacation next year. Maybe it's the home ownership. It may change over time. But security, aspiration.
Great. Well, we at the beginning of the program today, we had heard from Javita Carranza talking about tax reform, about how the tax system can be simplified. And obviously, tax reform is a huge issue right now, right in this building. As congressional leadership and the administration consider tax reform, what could they do policy-wise to get consumers to save more of their tax refund? And Tim, this is a great opportunity for you to sort of talk about the two bills you have in our packet.
Well, I appreciate that setup. I guess I would just offer this as a meta frame. I feel like if we don't have consensus, at least there's pretty broad agreement that we have a common interest in having people have some form of financial security late in life, right? In retirement. Like that sort of unspoken assumption now animates all kinds of federal policy. But the reality is for lots of folks, that's not the issue anymore. It's near term. And so the meta shift is it's not about financial security when people are 65, because we've got people that don't have that financial security when they're 25 and 35. And if you don't have it when you're 25 and 35, you're certainly not thinking about being 65. So I throw that out there because I think when we can extend from common ground, we're more likely to have a productive frame for the conversation. So then what does it get to in nuts and bolts? I mean, I think probably the most tangible thing are incentives to build emergency savings. And I don't think we have all the answers. That gets trickier, right? We don't have a lot of policy precedent for saying, Krista, I'm going to incent you to save for something you might draw down on 60 days from now. So I think there's work to be done, but we've got to start with the understanding that if we don't solve financial security for people today, tomorrow doesn't matter. And the other thing I would say is, and this is just a thought that we don't know, but sometimes the difference between zero and something is really dramatic, right? So we may have an opportunity for very small incentives to get people to file electronically, to get people to split their refund, to get people to buy a savings bond. Whatever the thing is, we may not need the degree of richness that we sometimes fill in our head when we think about large-scale incentive programs. Worth exploring. And the plug, some of these things exist and they're under threat. And so there is a very modest proposal called the Savings Act that would ask Congress to step up and say this split refund architecture and the ability to buy savings bonds should be law and not just administrative practice. And we should modernize that program instead of sort of thinking of it as the past. Like, what could the government do if we really thought towards the future of an electronic-based system that was plugged into the modern fintech world and made it easy for you to invest in government securities. So that's in your packet.
Ally McCall, policy?
I'll just reintroduce two bills who were introduced in the previous administration. One is the Financial Security Credit Act, similar to that will expand to, it was introduced by Joy Serrano in 2015, and it was expanded to give access to saver credit for low and moderate outcome household by providing a match, and that's including for saving the refund up to a 500 refundable credit. So this is one way to go. Another bill that was introduced by Senator Cory Booker in 2016 was the refund to rainy day savings that will allow taxpayer to defer 20% of the refund for 6 months. So that will create emergency savings, and that's kind of done by informing the work that have been done with the field and evidence coming from the refund to savings and others. So this is two bills that can, be rethinked about now.
Sure.
Well, I do not profess to be an expert on policy, and that's a very large caveat to what I will contribute to the conversation. But I think that that over the past 10 years, we have gone through a seismic change in consumer behavior and obviously seismic economic changes that I think have really influenced people's thinking about savings. This younger generation has potentially seen their parents lose a home. They've seen them lose assets. They've experienced job loss. They've experienced things that most recently, my parents were the last to have experienced. And I think that means that the messaging and the way that we talk, and a lot of changes happen from a public policy perspective that has brought protection to consumers and awareness to consumers about their rights and about, what opportunities that, what government, how they should be protected both by financial institutions and around their financial decisions. And I think that itself creates more fertile ground to have these conversations about what can be done on a boots on the ground level to repair and rebuild a lot of those communities and frankly to adjust our entire policy and infrastructure to this new reality, which is the gig economy, which is, no longer big institutional employers with security built in.
Great. Well, we're going to do one more question, and then I'm going to hand it over to you all for Q&A. So this is your cue to start thinking about the questions you'd like to ask. Before we get to that, though, Ms. Carranza was talking about the complexity of the tax code in the context of the administration's tax reform plans. Do you agree that sort of the complexity of the tax code makes it harder for consumers to save, or are there other reasons beyond in the tax code itself that might be considered for changes here besides the bills you talked about that would help consumers save more?
I mean, I would never argue against simplicity. I think that's always good. Do I think that for most of the consumers we imagine, tax code complexity is the biggest, barrier to saving? I'm not sure I would have phrased it that way. I think that we don't do nearly as much as I would like to see us do to raise up the possibilities that are there. You guys are not a good representative sample, so I won't ask you all to raise your hands. But if you go out to the average American or many of the people who probably come to VitaSites or use TurboTax, they don't know that the IRS has these capabilities. And the IRS has done, I think, all that they could inside their current restraints to try and constraints to try and make these tools like split refunds or the tax time savings bond purchase or the saver's credit make people realize they're there. But I think that's the thing that that comes to mind in terms of high impact that could happen, whether it's through tax reform or otherwise. Let's really try and make sure people know what these are. And again, with that dual, symbolism of we're telling you something important, it's probably something you should pay attention to.
I think Mary talked about it, but the first concern is the money that's getting left on the table. And I think a lot of low-income consumers just, in the tax preparation process may not be taking advantage of those things. And like Mary says, to have those frontline volunteers trained at that level, but also to be invested in an understanding like they themselves can be a change maker in somebody's lives. I think that is that is where the opportunity is. And so if the tax process can bring people into contact with maybe the only person that they're ever going to talk to about their money, and at the same time, geesh, if you're filling out this and this and this, and this is your situation, here are all the other resources that are made available to you. I mean, that is what it is. It's about the activity and using that opportunity to engage with that consumer and show them, empower them. Help them understand this is money that's in your hand. The money to save has arrived. Buck stops here.
I want to add one more perspective when we talk about the tax code and kind of remind how it's even set up, and maybe my recommendation is to rethink that and change a little bit of the incentive structure. So just, and that's also going back to the previous question on what are the barriers to save. Some of the barriers to save, or some of how, the flip side, so some of how middle and upper class families are saving is through the incentives and the money they get through the tax codes, through the incentives on deductions on mortgages, on education, so all the tax benefit, and that's how people are saving money, or through mandatory retirement program, and all of that doesn't have access to low-income families. So, for example, that just put some numbers on the table. The last year there were about $400 billion spending back on tax returns, but 95% of this went to families earning over $50,000 or more in a year. So clearly low-income families are staying out, they are not benefiting. It's 0.2, less than 1%, it's just really 0.2, almost 0% of people getting money back from the tax refund. So I think fixing that a little bit, providing more incentives for low-income people, get some this money back to the hands of low-income people, I think that's also in a great need.
Great. Well, we got some time for Q&A. I would just ask that because we're recording this, you wait for the mic to get to you, and then just identify yourself.
Hi, good morning. This is James Gatz from the Treasury Department. Good to see you guys. I just had a question about this idea that tax moment is the right moment to make the decision. Because I also hear from the Vita people people who run Vita sites, that a lot of times people come and they already know what they're going to do with their money, with their refund. So I'm just curious, do we know when people make that decision? Has there been research done that's sort of asked, is it in November 24th or October 17th? When is that? And if that's so, would that help us think about how to develop programs or tools that help people commit at that time?
Well, I could start off. I don't know that I'm going to give you a very satisfactory answer, but I saw a TED Talk a short time ago with a person who's involved with the Georgia Saves campaign, who's a sort of a financial advisor, but a person who does sort of holistic financial advising. And he came from a very poor family, and he talked about watching his mother struggle, and this has really inspired him to help others. And he talked about this idea of like someone coming in and saying they wanted to buy a TV, a big screen, large screen TV with their tax refund. And his immediate response was, please save some of your money, don't blow it on a TV. And she turned to him and said, I have 3 kids, teenage children, and I live in a really bad neighborhood. And if I have a really nice TV in my house, the chances are that those kids and the others will be on my couch. So these are kinds of the decision points where we're meeting those people, and so we have to kind of unpack that baggage so that we're able to speak in their language. And again, it's about the empowerment. So it may be, and I think it's a great question, is tax time the moment? I think, and that's why I say, like, experientially, tax time is the moment where we invite you to imagine. We invite you to imagine what could be possible. And here, let's think about it. Maybe the TV is your most important point right now. And that's a good expenditure, and you're doing the right thing for your family. And let's just kind of make a plan from here so you can continue to do that.
I think going back to the question about when people make the decision and what we know from research. So there is a lot of research that does show that people plan a lot in ahead, think about it, and know, work of the financial diary, work from Katie Edin, work from the refund to saving. People do plan on how they're going to use the refund. A lot of them are save, and they save it either to gift or to this. Many people also say that they want to, when we ask them how they're kind of going to plan to spend the whole refund, a third saying they want to save it, like they want to save a third of their refund, clear debt with it, and a third will go to consumption. So people do plan, do know ahead, and also they remember the refund from last year at the exact point, from 6 months ago. It's a really important financial wheel draw for low-income families.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the core point seems so right, that there's so much pressure on that moment, and that people do make decisions in advance. I don't know that we have the answers exactly. We did some early testing with a soft pre-commitment last year, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 10% of our mailing list responded and raised their hand and say, yeah, I want to save. So those were in November, I think. So I think the more we can do to kind of stretch that moment out so that it starts ahead and also extends beyond, so that we're not only left with, confronting people with so many opportunities and trying to have them make those decisions, but it's there's more to learn there.
Great.
And if the tax time moment isn't the right moment, but we're able to get people to make a commitment to themselves, and that's really what America Saves brings to the table, is the pledge, then we can begin nurturing that conversation through technology.
And so I apologize. As I suspected, the expertise to my left has warped my sense of space-time, and we are at at the hour. I would invite anybody who has questions who we weren't able to get to, if you guys don't mind sticking around just a few minutes to answer them. I also, before I hand it over to Dave, just want to thank Intuit, as well as the American Bankers Association Foundation, for being such great partners on this event. We're really proud to have NCL's name next to yours to talk about this really, really amazing program that you all are running, and that is being run by so many of the organizations here. So, Dave?
Well, let me just say thank you to the panel. Thank you all for sticking through. We've heard, I think, interestingly enough, there wasn't a consistent theme or set of answers here for people. If you didn't notice the cafeteria plans that we were talking about, there were many different menus that people had. And so clearly there's a lot of work to be done to identify what are the opportunities that one can seize around tax time. I do want actually to touch a little bit on the tax time moment, since that would be the theme of the conference. And I think the reality is that there are a lot of things that policymakers and frankly, folks who've been sitting at this table, not necessarily these folks, but certainly these folks, would like people to do, would like people to think about. They don't always think the way policymakers would like them to. And one example of that that I hear coming up, and so this will be the controversial part of our program, is how we need to reintroduce the advanced EITC. Because policymakers think it's a great idea and because people are going to smooth their incomes as a result. The reality is that many people chose not to use the advanced EITC because of income volatility and the inability to predict what their incomes would be over the course of the year and the fear of having to pay it back. We live in a world that was referenced earlier where income volatility, I think McCall made this point, and we certainly will be at the Intuit Tax Financial Center, income volatility is actually growing, particularly among low and moderate income people as they enter the gig economy. And so while those of us who can think about the right economic choices for people may also find that people do not act rationally. That's what behavioral economics is all about. People make choices that aren't rational, and for those of you who took Micro 101 way back when I was ancient, you've discovered that they've just tossed that whole playbook out the door, and now we're talking about people behaving in irrational ways, and we need to be able to predict them, which is what makes this field so fascinating, because there aren't clear answers. People aren't making the decisions we think they should make that are right for them, and we actually don't know what's right for them. Maybe getting that TV is the right thing for that person. At another conference a few years ago, another speaker talked about how someone had invested a lot of money in buying a whole bunch of food for her refrigerator or freezer. Her point was that's a form of savings because for the next 6 months, her family actually had food and she didn't have to work. And so as we come to this with our different perspectives and our different frames, I think it's also important to recognize that those are our biases and that people that we are seeking to at least enable or I think empower may have very, very different views about all of this. And that's why there's no single answer here, and that's why we're going to keep pushing on it. So there's a lot more to be said in this space. In the meantime, thank you, everyone, for your time today, and thank you for coming. And there's still drinks in the back. So.
Thank you.